Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Organised Writer. How to stay on top of all your projects and never miss a deadline. By Antony Johnston. Narrated by Antony Johnston.
Introduction. Becoming an organised writer. Be regular and orderly in your life so that you may be violent and original in your work. Gustave Flaubert, Letter to Madame Tennant, 1876. I'm a novelist and short story writer, graphic novelist, screenwriter, video game scriptwriter and consultant, musician and podcaster. I attend conventions, talk at conferences, and make regular public appearances. I was first published in 1996 while holding down a day job, and since 2002 I've been a full-time professional author. I tell you this not to brag, but to explain why this book exists and why I'm qualified to write it. All writers get stressed out over plot, characters, conflict, resolution, backstory, timelines, world building, consistency, editor's notes, cover art, titles, book blurbs, good reviews, bad reviews, you name it. If it's related to writing, we get stressed over it. That's not the problem. Writing isn't easy, and no book can help you with that, especially if you're trying out new things all the time, as any good author should. Sweating over those things is what makes you a writer. But you shouldn't be stressing out over missed deadlines, reaching the end of another day and wondering where all the time you'd intended to spend writing has gone, trying to remember where you put your notes, your contract, or your cat, discovering you should have filed your tax return 2 weeks ago, worrying about office and admin tasks piling up, or being unable to relax when you should be having fun with friends and family because your writing is behind schedule. That kind of stress will send you to an early grave, make you no fun to be around, and even prevent you doing your best work. It's a self-imposed tyranny that prevents you being able to focus on writing because you're too distracted by all the other tasks you haven't yet started, let alone finished. You can change that if you're willing to put in the work. The first 5 years of my life as a full-time writer were spent playing endless games of, where on earth did I put that contract? Oh God, the deadline for this script was last week. How can this many unread emails even exist? Before I finally realized managing your work isn't something that magically happens around you while you type. It takes practice. It takes discipline. It takes being an organized writer. This audiobook is for writers of all kinds. You might be established, or just starting out, a working professional or an enthusiastic amateur, writing fiction or non-fiction, have a traditional contract or prefer to self-publish, write full-time or part-time, be a novelist, poet, screenwriter, playwright, historian, games writer, or something else entirely. Whatever kind of writer you are, whatever your personal situation, The Organised Writer can help you. It's not a book on how to write, but it is a practical guide designed to help you with all the other aspects of a writer's life, getting organized, managing your time, making better use of the time you have, and keeping track of your work and business affairs. The Organised Writer draws on more than a decade of my own career and working life, during which time I've successfully juggled dozens of different projects without ever missing a deadline. It describes a holistic system that helps you achieve a structure and routine, freeing you to immerse yourself more fully in creative work by rewarding consistency while boosting creativity. To that end, first I'll explain the concepts and thinking behind the system, which will help you understand and implement the practical advice that follows. And if you do find something within these pages that absolutely, positively won't work for your situation, why not take the raw material as inspiration, use that inspiration to craft something that uniquely suits your style, and finally polish it to make it as useful as possible. After all, that's what writers do. A productive timeline. I used everything in this book to write this book. The truth is, I didn't set out to create a productivity system. When I became a full-time writer, I assumed all I'd have to do was write, answer a few emails, and send an invoice every once in a while. What else could a writer possibly have to worry about? I was laughably wrong, but also far from alone. The same error is made by many writers and other freelance creatives. It's especially common among those of us who are leaving a corporate environment as we often don't appreciate the sheer amount of administration hidden from our daily working life because our employer took care of it. After a few years of freelancing, my career was taking off, and I had more work than ever. But along with more creative work comes ever more non-creative work, boring stuff like invoicing and accounts and tax and office supplies. Sure, we all want to see how much money is coming in, but who wants to take time away from creative writing to deal with office admin and file taxes? That reluctance to take care of non-creative affairs is how, after about 3 years of working like this, I found myself drowning in a sea of unanswered emails, unsent and therefore unpaid invoices, lost project notes, mislaid schedules, and, worst of all in my eyes, the cardinal sin, missed deadlines. I never missed deadlines, except suddenly I'd missed 2. That was the jolt I needed to understand that this lackadaisical approach was untenable, that I needed to implement some kind of structure to properly keep track of my schedule and business. Is it ironic that it took an adverse effect on my writing work to make me finally decide to get my non-writing work organised? Perhaps, but I'm guessing the same could be said for most of you listening to this. My first port of call was, naturally, the internet. I don't recall the exact search terms I used or the precise path I took when looking for help in the resultant cascade of search results, but I was soon awash in a sea of productivity systems, a term I'd never even encountered before. GTD, Pomodoro, Midori, Nozbe, Kanban, such baffling acronyms and neologisms, all promising to hold the key to a better life, a more organised existence where stress and chaos were banished to the past. I began reading up on these systems, and quickly realised most of them were not for me or writers of any stripe. I don't just mean in terms of attitude or outlook, but also because of their target audience. Corporate leaders, business executives, lawyers and managers and supervisors, oh my. There's nothing wrong with that, but it makes those systems terribly ill-suited to creative workers. Few of us are fortunate enough to have an assistant, let alone an office full of employees. More importantly, productivity systems aimed at corporate managers and workers make assumptions about how a typical day is structured that are way off the mark when it comes to creative work. I found this out the hard way by trying to implement those systems and failing terribly. But I persevered because I could see there was something to be learned from them. Under the assumptions about staff and schedules and resources was a glimmer of light, one I felt could be nourished and cultivated into something that would illuminate my own situation. I had to figure out what a creative professional needs from a productivity system, and to do that meant looking with rather brutal honesty at my own situation. The Organised Writer began with a single short article I published on my website way back in 2007, outlining the very first version of this system after a year of successfully using it myself. I expected it would be read by a few friends and colleagues who might take away 1 or 2 useful tips before it would be forgotten. When it racked up 500,000 hits in the first 6 months, though, I realised I had in fact struck a nerve. I went on to write other short articles and blog posts about my notes-to-story process, how I use writing software, and more. All were popular, and people told me I had a good voice for making this sort of thing useful and easy to read. People who weren't even writers told me how much they enjoyed reading these articles. Eventually, friends began to ask when I would write a book about getting organised, something to expand on the system, and go into more depth on both administrative and creative matters. I said I'd think about it, but I was too busy to give it my full attention and, ironically, could never find the time to write it. Now, at last, here it is. Assumptions and caveats. For the sake of simplicity and clarity, I'm going to make certain assumptions. I apologise in advance if they're not true for your situation. I assume you're a writer of some experience, whether published or not, whose working life is chaotic and disorganised. I assume you use a computer, that you have internet access and are comfortable performing basic online tasks even if you're not technically minded. I also assume that you input text through a keyboard and are generally able-bodied and neurotypical. But everything here can be used and adapted by writers of different circumstances, and maybe even by non-writers, artists, musicians, designers, anyone engaging in a creative endeavour, either as is or with only minor modification. Because the main assumption I make is that you're smart enough to see how a specific method or usage may not fit your own situation or working style with absolute precision, but it would only take a tweak here, a poke there to make it fit. Smart enough to see the underlying philosophy that permeates these pages and figure out how you can use its principles in ways that are relevant to you and compatible with your life. If you're able to, begin by following everything in here to the letter. You'll find complete routines and instructional methods, and if you're completely at sea in terms of organisation, adopting these practices will give you a stable base from which to develop your own personalised habits. But if for some reason you're unable to follow my advice to the letter, with only a little extra work, the Organised Writer can be a template which you can adapt in order to build your own system. Clean mind theory. I subscribe to something called clean mind theory, so allow me to briefly explain what that means. Relax, it has nothing to do with morals. I admit it's unscientific. I have no quantifiable evidence beyond my own experience and that of friends and colleagues, but my experience backs it up. What do I mean by a clean mind? Quite simply, it's the state we find ourselves in when we first wake up, before we allow the demands of our daily life to begin taking up space in our thoughts. I firmly believe that most creative people, especially writers, are more productive when our mind is clean. The more we allow the real world to barge its way into our consciousness and take up space, the less able we are to lose ourselves in the state of imaginative creativity necessary for us to work. Thus, messy-minded people struggle to get work done, and the quality of what they do achieve is below their best. Now, those of you with children or other dependents are probably throwing your hands up in despair, but hear me out. If you need to get your kids ready for school, or walk your dogs, or attend to any other family matters first thing, then of course those duties must be carried out. But such tasks don't require you to continue thinking about them after they're done. Once the kids are sent off, or the dogs are in their beds, you can mentally check them off and forget about them for the time being. And whether or not you have dependents, you may also have a day job, a situation I'll touch on later. The Organised Writer is nothing if not pragmatic, and understands that life often dictates your schedule. That's okay, because you can still put its principles to use. Even if your schedule doesn't allow you to follow the system exactly, you can still practice many of its methods, such as note-taking, time management, and ubiquitous thought capture. No mind can ever be perfectly clean, because such a mind would be one without personality or much of a life. Nevertheless, the cleaner it is while we work, the more distance we put between ourselves and everyday mundanities, trusting that they'll be dealt with at the right time, the more we can get done without being distracted by ordinary concerns, and the better our writing will be as a result. How to use this audiobook. The Organised Writer is divided into 3 main sections. Part 1, Get Organised, explains how to organise your time and schedule, making the most of both your writing sessions and any spare time you might have. It promotes the value of taking good notes, shows how best to use and make to-do lists, and explains why you should adopt a simple task management system. Part 2, Write, is all about what to do with the time you allot to writing, how best to optimize those sessions so you can write more and better on any given day. It gives advice on incorporating travel without ruining your schedule, and explains why just right is not a flippant hand wave, but in fact a valuable part of every writer's self-improvement. This section walks you through my own scribbles to script process to show you how the Organised Writer's principles and practices help me to develop an initial idea into a fully fledged work. Part 3, non-writing stuff, deals with all the tasks other than writing that you must take into consideration. Finances, spreadsheets, and office admin. It walks you step by step through the process of stripping down, assessing, and then reorganizing your workspace to put the system into practice. Finally, it describes what to look for in the equipment, hardware, and software you use. At the end of each chapter is a summary of its main points. You can use these as cheat sheets when you begin practicing the system, but I strongly suggest you listen to the relevant chapter before using them to avoid confusion. The chapters describe the reasoning and motivation behind each part of the process and explain why the system encourages you to do things a certain way. Absorbing this detail will help you use the system and summary sheets more effectively. The good news is you won't need the summaries for long. The methods and practices of the Organised Writer are natural and intuitive, and after a short time, you'll find they become habitual. I suggest you listen to the whole audiobook once, from beginning to end, without taking any action. Then listen to it a second time with the perspective of having now seen the whole picture, and begin to plan how you can implement the system. Next, take a weekend, literally, see Chapter 7, to sort out your working space, and on the following Monday, begin putting the system into practice. Don't worry if you falter along the way. You'll be making a lot of big changes, and slipping back into bad habits occasionally is natural. Keep the audiobook handy, and refer to it as necessary to get yourself back in the saddle. Over time, you'll develop and cement new, better habits, and find yourself needing the audiobook less often. Eventually, you'll reach a place where you're practicing the system without consciously thinking about it, which is the ultimate goal. Nothing would make me happier than for you to listen to this audiobook, put its methods into practice, then pass it on to a friend or colleague who might need it. Throughout this audiobook, I sometimes recommend software, tools, and products. These are all my own independent and unbiased opinion, derived directly from personal experience. No company, brand, or product mentioned has paid or compensated me in any way for inclusion or recommendation. I have no partnerships, arrangements, sponsorships, or quid pro quo with anyone for equipment, software licenses, computers, stationery, or anything else that might influence my opinion. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, as Stratford's favourite son wrote. Part 1. Get Organised. Chapter 1. Fasten your seatbelt. A disorganised writer is not consistent in how they conduct their working life from day to day and lives in perpetual panic mode. The organised writer has a system in place to deal with all aspects of their working day, while staying flexible enough to apply common sense. If the organised writer could be summed up in a word, it would be focus. Everything here is designed to increase that focus and remove the possibilities for you to succumb to its natural enemy, distraction. We gain focus when we lose ourselves in a task, when it's all that we're thinking about, with our conscious brain power fully devoted to it. Every writer knows this feeling. Some call it flow, being in the zone, or getting on a roll. There are many different terms for it, but they all mean the same thing. Reaching a state where you forget about everything except the work in front of you. How do we achieve this blissful, elusive state? The answer is as simple to describe as it is difficult to implement, by eliminating distraction. I'm not necessarily talking about things like a noisy environment, music playing, or people chatting around you. Some writers are able to focus perfectly well in such circumstances. In fact, the environment in which you most easily find your focus is almost certainly different to that of other writers. For some, the ideal working setup is a noisy, anonymous place like a coffee shop or diner. For others, it's a completely quiet and disconnected room, silent and windowless. And for most of us, it's somewhere in between. I prefer a dedicated room to reinforce the idea that I'm going to work when I step through the study door, but far from needing silence, I actually prefer to have music playing while I work, and my window looks out over a local park. By contrast, I know one very successful writer whose first years of freelance writing were spent at a corner of her kitchen table, banging away on her laptop in between bouts of wrangling infant children, or at ungodly pre-dawn hours to give herself some uninterrupted time. I know another who wears headphones, but instead of listening to music through them, he plays computer-generated white noise to shut out the real world. Ask 10 writers to describe their ideal writing environment and you'll get 11 different answers. That's not what I mean by distraction. What I'm talking about, what I'm confident every writer in history would agree is the mortal enemy of our art, is something I call memory distraction. Memory distraction is sabotage from within. It's what happens when you're trying to remember everything that you need to do and keep this list in your mind because you fear that if you forget about it for a moment, it will be gone forever. And you're probably right. How many times have you sat down, ready to work, but just a few words in, you suddenly remember that you need to call a client this week? You mentally file it away, resume writing, but by the next paragraph, you're thinking about the email you got from your editor this morning and how you'll reply to it. Shaking that off, you return to your work document, but 2 sentences later, you remember a story idea you had last night that still sounds pretty good. And don't forget you still need to call that client and reply to your editor's email, and on and on. Filled with this ever-mounting detritus, your brain becomes an obstacle course of time-wasting hazards and energy-sapping anxiety which you try in vain to negotiate. Before you know it, the day is over, your stress levels are through the roof, and you still haven't finished that chapter. Sound familiar? You're not alone. This section is about getting yourself and your work environment and practices organized in order to eliminate as much memory distraction as possible, leaving you free to focus on your writing. Buckle up. If focus is the ultimate aim, then the path by which we achieve it is filled with a host of preparatory work, all of it based around the simple principle of reducing the amount of effort and energy you have to spend on thinking about anything that isn't writing. If your mind is occupied by questions like, where should I file this letter? Where's that bank statement I received last week? When's that call with my editor again? What do I need to work on tomorrow to stay ahead of deadline? Wait, are my accounts due yet? What was that great idea I had yesterday? Then you're going to have a hard time concentrating on writing. That's memory distraction in a nutshell. The human brain can hold, on average, 7 items in its short-term memory, and each will only stay in our memory for about 30 seconds unless we rehearse them, i.e. repeat the list of items regularly to maintain them. In 1956, the famed psychologist George Miller codified this principle in his paper The Magical Number 7 ± 2, Some Limits on Our Capacity for Processing Information. And it came to be known as Miller's Law. As with all things relating to human cognition, it's difficult to draw universal or absolute conclusions, and studies continue to this day on the nature and abilities of human memory. But Miller's Law is compelling and aligns with what many of us feel instinctively. How many times have you been so preoccupied trying to remember the half-dozen things you need to do that you just can't bear to take on another item? That's because item rehearsal places a large cognitive load on our mind, forcing it to the forefront of our thoughts. Doing this while trying to write leads directly to memory distraction because it clashes with precisely the kind of mental juggling in which we're already engaged for our work. When writing, we're attempting to hold and organize in our memory a large number of things related to what we're working on. The next word, the next sentence, the reason we're writing this sentence at this point, the conclusion we want to make at the end of the paragraph, how the viewpoint character relates to their current situation, why something from their character history makes this moment important, how the current scene will affect the following scene, how this chapter relates to those around it. We hold all these things and more in our memory without much conscious thought because they're all connected to the matter at hand and relevant to our writing. But what if we're also trying not to forget the calls we need to make, admin tasks we have to perform, filing that must be done, this evening's shopping list, and more? Now all these other thoughts none of them relevant to what we're writing, are fighting for a place in our short-term memory. If we focus on them, we risk forgetting everything else we're trying to remember that actually is relevant to our writing. If we focus entirely on writing instead, we forget the other tasks we were supposed to do. Phone calls don't get made, groceries don't get bought, accounts don't get filed. Most of the time we wind up somewhere in between, remembering part of each group, but neither of them as a whole. Not only does our writing suffer, but we also forget to buy milk while picking up the kids. It's a lose-lose situation. How do we fix this problem? How do we eliminate, or at least significantly reduce, memory distraction without the risk of forgetting the tasks we need to perform? We remove unnecessary things from our memory and put them in a safe place. You may think I'm speaking metaphorically, but I'm not. Removing things from memory isn't something you can consciously do, of course. You can't make yourself forget something any more than you can prevent yourself thinking of an elephant when you hear this sentence. What you can do is offload an item out of your memory and into a safe place, a place where you know you'll be reminded of it at the right time, but not before. If you do that, and you completely trust the system to remind you of the item in question at a more appropriate time, you'll forget it naturally. Your brain will relax, subconsciously aware that it doesn't need to rehearse the item to hold it in memory, and thus let it slip away. You might think you could do this with a simple to-do list. Just write everything down on a piece of paper. In theory, you could, but a piece of paper won't hold all of your bank statements, or deal with your tax return, or remind you when it's time to send your mother a birthday card. This system isn't about simply making lists of things to do. It's about establishing a system of habits, patterns, and delegation, whether to a person or a computer, that allows you to perform this offloading of tasks to make your actual writing time as productive as possible. Eventually, this offloading will become a habit, the default method you use to organize your life, and that elusive focus on your writing will be easier than ever to achieve. There's no greater feeling than sitting down at your keyboard and knowing, without any nagging doubts, that you can work for several solid hours free from worry that you might have forgotten something important you need to do. If it's about more than writing lists, how do we offload these items from our memory? How do we build a simple system that ensures we don't forget anything, don't lose anything, are reminded of time-sensitive tasks at the right time, and write more productively? We do it with the help of a handy acronym, FASTEN. Filing, assistance, say no, time, equipment, and notes. Filing. Filing everything, both short and long-term records, in a simple and comprehensive way means you're never worried about where to put something or where to look when you need to retrieve it. Assistance. Employing people to whom you delegate tasks for which you have neither the time, expertise, or inclination, accountants, contract agents, lawyers, frees you to work without worrying that your legal and business affairs aren't being taken care of. Say no. Being mindful of which projects you take on and which you turn down allows you to work without being distracted by mounting apprehension about all the jobs you don't really want to do, but to which you've mistakenly committed yourself. Time. Managing your time properly and using your calendar as a flexible planning tool means you're not worried about missing deadlines or appointments. Equipment. Investing in good quality equipment, be it hardware like a great chair or computer, or software for writing or record keeping, puts your mind at ease and prevents you becoming frustrated with your tools. And notes. Taking immediate and comprehensive notes of story ideas, revision thoughts, people to email, places to research, and anything else that comes to mind frees you from the distraction of trying to rehearse thoughts and ideas in your memory. Rest easy. Simple though it may be, this acronym isn't a mnemonic you have to remember or a mantra for you to chant each morning. After all, the point is to clean your mind, not clutter it with jargon. Nevertheless, the fastened principles permeate what you're about to read. Referring to them.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?